Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you all for being here today. Some of you may still know Northern Shield as a nickel-copper PG explorer, but really in 2018 we sort of reinvented ourselves as an epithermal gold explorer in eastern Canada to take advantage of an opportunity that came our way. And we were very happy with the progress there. And in this presentation, we'll be focusing on updating and recapping on the Shot Rock property in Nova Scotia, and then providing an introduction to the Root and Cellar project that we just acquired in Newfoundland. I have a lot more entertaining slides than this to show you, so we won't spend any more time on it, and we'll move forward from the forward-looking statement advisory. So why is Northern Shield so interested in epithermal systems, and why should you be? Well, it's because of this. Here's an example, a photograph from the Hishikari deposit in Japan, one of the youngest epithermal systems in the world. And as you can see, this one's running about 950 gram per ton gold and 3,700 gram per ton silver. These are not uncommon values in low sulfidation epithermal systems. And that's why one of the reasons why we are attracted to them. And now you're seeing a small group of mid-tier companies that are sort of focusing on acquiring these low sulfidation systems. So Shot Rock, as some of you may know, is located in north-central Nova Scotia, between the town of New Glasgow and Antigonish, smack dab on the Trans-Canada Highway, about an hour and a half drive from Halifax. One of the other good things about the province of Nova Scotia is the government has a mineral resource fund, and they'll actually fund up to $100,000 for each individual program that you're conducting in the province. So as a recap for those that are not familiar with it, this project was brought to us by a very industrious young prospector who was following up on historic stream sediment samples that were highly anomalous in gold, but for which no bedrock source had been found in the past 40 or 50 years. But very early on, for some of the rocks that he provided and during our due diligence, the chemistry and rock textures provided us an early indication of a low sulfidation gold system. And that certainly caught our attention, because up until then, there is no known low sulfidation system in the province of Nova Scotia. And so we quickly followed up the first phase of that program in the summer of 2018, so less than a year ago, was again blanket the property with stream sediment samples. Most of those reproduced those historic results, but importantly, they also showed this area up in here, which highlighted what we call the highway zone, where we had a very distinct cluster of very strong gold anomalies in stream sediment samples. So very quickly, we went prospecting. Initially, we were finding literally hundreds of very angular boulders exhibiting the classic low sulfidation textures, such as colliform banding and crustiform banding, as exhibited by that picture in the bottom left. And then eventually, we started finding these things in outcrop. And it was really at this show back in November, for the first time, we confirmed the discovery of a low sulfidation system in Nova Scotia that was also gold-bearing. So since then, this is a compilation of the Shot Rock property to date. I say the initial discovery was outlined in here in yellow. That most of that work was done at the end of last season, just before the first snow came. All those red squares represent gold anomalous samples. We have about 100 there right now, all anomalous in gold, anywhere from 25 ppb to about 3.3 gram per ton. Our prospector has been on the ground ever since actually really midwinter, whenever he can, whenever the snow conditions allow, and we've now got our mapping crew on the ground. And most importantly, we're now beginning to expand from that discovery area. We're pushing up to the northeast, where we're finding more large quartz veins in that area. And much more importantly, we're pushing westward about 2 kilometers, where we always had hints of some gold anomalies, as you can see by those few pink squares. But now we're finding abundant banded quartz vein and outcrop, a lot of stockwork, and a whole pile of angular boulders that we still haven't found the source for, but they're all suggesting they're coming in this area. So just within the first literally 10 days of being on the ground with our mapping team, we've expanded the footprint of this thing quite considerably, about 2 kilometers to the west. So just remember, it's important to remember the epithermal systems, because those values of 25 ppb to 3 grams that we're getting may not sound particularly exciting, but it's very important to understand the zonation, the geometry of low sulfidation systems. We have this layer we call the boiling point. I'm not going to get into technical detail of what that is, but basically above that boiling point, you don't expect to see a lot of gold. You may see your quartz veins, but typical gold values, even in Nevada, will be on the order of 25 ppb. But those grades can transition very rapidly to bonanza grades at or below that boiling cap. The textures of the rock we see at Shot Rock suggest that we are above that boiling cap. In fact, the discovery zone is probably quite close to the boiling cap. probably somewhere up in here, whereas we move west into that western extension, we're probably even a little bit higher up in here. But we're clearly above the boiling cap, but we are seeing gold, so we certainly like what that would suggest to be finding at depth. To provide a little bit more detail, this is the geophysics that we flew very early on in the year. Just to provide some context, this is, I say, mostly the discovery zone in here, and that's basically a dilatant zone, and that's where we're seeing a lot of these very big quartz veins that we're finding to date, about 1.5 meters in diameter. The stockwork tends to be on the edges, where there's more compression than along here. We're really finding everything: stockwork, sheeted quartz veins, and a multiple sets of parallel veining. So here's an example of one of the very large 1.5 meter banded quartz veins we found last week. That's in the dilatant zone. Here's stockwork along the wall of the fault within the discovery zone. And of course, we're finding plenty of here's a very large banded boulder, again from the western zone. We'll have to find where that came from, but it's somewhere in the west. And again, just a handful of photographs showing spectacular textures that are very common in epithermal systems. I'm particularly interested in this one. The prospector tells me that's pyrite in that band along that top vein. I'm not sure it's pyrite, but anyhow, we'll have assays pending for all these samples. So just to summarize on the shot rock portion, as I say, this is a Google Map image taken from the Trans-Canada Highway just to highlight how close it is to the Trans-Canada Highway. And so to date, within less than 1 year, we've gone from having absolutely no background knowledge really on the shot rock area from discovering a highly prized low sulfidation epithermal quartz vein within earshot of the Trans-Canada Highway. So now we'll move on to the root and cellar acquisition in Newfoundland. As I say, we've been gaining a lot of knowledge on shot rocks. We decided to try to look a little bit further afield, and I've been eyeing this project for a number of months now, and finally came to deals with the prospector just last week. The root and cellar property actually sits in the same geological terrain as shot rock, so that again, we can build up our knowledge base from both projects. It also has excellent access. It's a 3-kilometer drive from St. John's. It's located 10 minutes from the town of Marystown, which is also a deep water port, and there's hydroelectricity right on site. Now, the Burin Peninsula actually hosts about 8 known high sulfidation epithermal systems. Perhaps the most well-known is Hickey's Pond, which is seeing a lot of revival by a company called Bonavista Resources, a private company. It's a high sulfidation system. Generally, there's a trend towards low sulfidation as you get to the south of the peninsula, and certainly the textures we're seeing at root and cellar suggest it's probably a low sulfidation system. Interesting enough, too, all these pink shaded areas up here are the granite bodies, which are probably driving the fluids for these high sulfidation systems. Most of those are fairly old, about 540 million years old. But interestingly enough, right next to the root and cellar, that red blob is a Devonian-aged granite intrusion, so that's much younger. And we see the same age of rocks at shot rocks. So these two projects may be very well connected. As you also see very strong similarities in the rocks at shot rock and root and cellar. And so root and cellar is a little bit more deeply eroded, but that gives us a lot of hint at what we may be expecting at shot rock if we can get down a few more tens of meters. To give you an example of what we're seeing at root and cellar, there's a compilation of the showing maps from this prospector. I can tell you the only one that has seen any exploration from a mining company is this one, Braxton Bradley, which had some drilling in the 90s. All these other showings and occurrences were discovered by a prospector. They haven't been touched by mining exploration. It's been boot and hammer prospecting, shoveling, and trenching. And so you can see some of these values are quite spectacular. Out here in the west of this 5-kilometer trend, you have up to 45 grams per ton gold, 1,300 ppm silver. Again, in the middle of the Conquest zone, you have 47 grams of gold over 0.5 meter channel sample. And I say these are not individual samples. These are a collection. Conquest itself is probably about 150 samples there that are anomalous in gold. So this is a very, very extensive system and certainly high grade. On top of that, you have this 5-kilometer trend of low sulfidation gold-silver mineralization. And as sort of a bonus, or it's confusing us a little, is the copper values. We have this copper showing in the west that appears to cross-cut the main gold system. but there certainly are some very high grades of copper associated with a little bit of molybdenum and zinc. But I know I've been trying to get my hands on this property, say, for the last few months. And finally, we came to terms just last week, and I got some emails today from several other mining companies saying congratulations because they're eyeing this project, and they just hadn't got around yet to doing a deal. So it's pretty amazing to be able to find a project with these type of values still on surface that have been untouched by exploration. That's just an example of the showing. I say this prospector found this all by just sweeping off the outcrops, you know, and shoveling it and then washing it down with a bucket of water. So if you can find that with by that method, we like our chances of really expanding on this resource with mechanical trenching. So we're mainly after the gold, but the copper makes better pictures, and there's also some pretty spectacular values there. You know, 3 samples over 5% copper, 11 over 1, and another 40 between 0.1 and 1% copper. So it's not something we're going to walk away from either, but certainly some spectacular samples. So going forward, we have an experienced advisory team. We've just hired as a consultant the ex-former chief geochemist of Barrick, who's helping us get our heads around all these epithermal systems. We have mapping underway right now with the idea of getting to drilling late summer on shot rock. We have about 400 or 500 samples pending assays right now, and we'll be starting exploration at Root and Cellar by doing some trenching probably mid-June, as well as trenching at the cobalt showing in 5 Islands. So just to summarize, we think this is a new belt of rocks that's beginning to draw a lot of attention, not just for epithermal golds, but of course you have the Oceania down in Carolina. But Northern Shields is certainly setting itself up as I don't want to say the epithermal specialist, but we're certainly, now that we've got our heads around shot rock, looking for other projects. And with Root and Cellar, it certainly fits well into our portfolio. So I'd say it's very early stages, but I think you'll see some rapid advancements on both these projects this summer. Thank you very much.